Imagine this. It's 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Manhattan, and you're already running 15 minutes late for the most important presentation of your career. You're packed like a sardine in a subway car that's been sitting motionless in a tunnel for the past 10 minutes, with no announcement from the conductor. Your phone battery is at 3%, your coffee has gone cold, and the person next to you is playing music loud enough that you can hear every bass note through their headphones. Your jaw is clenched, your shoulders are tense, and you can feel that familiar surge of anger building in your chest. Or maybe you're navigating the infamous 405 freeway in Los Angeles during rush hour. What should have been a 30-minute drive to pick up your kids has turned into an hour-and-a-half nightmare of brake lights and lane cutters. Every merge feels personal. Every slow driver seems to be targeting you specifically, and you find yourself gripping the steering wheel so tightly your knuckles have turned white. Perhaps you're walking through downtown Chicago on a brutal February morning, wind cutting through your coat like a knife, when you discover that your usual coffee shop has inexplicably run out of coffee at 8 a.m. It's the third thing that's gone wrong before you've even reached your office, and you can feel your patience evaporating faster than your breath in the frigid air. These moments, these daily battles with frustration, inconvenience, and the seeming chaos of modern urban life are universal. They're the small wars we fight every single day, and they're slowly but surely shaping who we become. The question isn't whether these situations will happen. They will. The question is, how will you respond when they do? Today, we're going to explore something revolutionary, something that has the power to transform not just these moments of frustration, but your entire relationship with anger itself. We're diving deep into the ancient wisdom of Stoicism, a philosophy born in the bustling markets and chaotic streets of ancient Athens and Rome, cities not so different from our own modern metropolises. The Stoics understood something profound about human nature and the art of living well. They recognized that while we cannot control the subway delays, the traffic jams, or the inconsiderate behavior of others, we possess absolute sovereignty over something far more powerful: our response. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire while facing plagues, wars, and political turmoil, wrote his personal reflections on this very principle. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before becoming one of history's greatest teachers of freedom, showed us that true liberty comes not from external circumstances, but from internal mastery. Seneca, navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics and business, demonstrated how philosophical wisdom could be applied to the practical challenges of daily life. These weren't ivory tower philosophers removed from real-world pressures. They were people dealing with the same fundamental human challenges we face today. Difficult people, unexpected setbacks, time pressures, and the constant test of maintaining inner peace in an often chaotic world. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore 8 transformative lessons that these ancient masters developed to not just survive life's inevitable frustrations, but to use them as stepping stones to greater wisdom, resilience, and inner peace. Lesson 1. Acknowledging anger as natural. Meet Sarah, a marketing director at a prestigious advertising agency in downtown Manhattan. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp, she holds a team meeting to review the day's priorities. But there's one colleague, Marcus, who consistently shows up 10 minutes late, coffee in hand, offering a casual, "Sorry, traffic," as he settles into his chair. Today, as Sarah watches Marcus stroll in at 9:12 a.m. while she's mid-sentence explaining a critical client deadline, she feels that familiar heat rising in her chest. Her jaw tightens, her voice becomes slightly sharper, and she finds herself fighting the urge to call him out in front of the entire team. This is anger in its most recognizable form, immediate, visceral, and completely human. And here's the first revolutionary insight that Stoicism offers us. This anger is not your enemy. It's not a character flaw, a sign of weakness, or something you should be ashamed of feeling. Epictetus, the great Stoic teacher who understood human nature perhaps better than anyone, taught us that emotions like anger are as natural as breathing. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, he reminded his students. Notice that he didn't say, don't feel anything when things happen to you. He acknowledged that we will feel, the power lies in what we do next. The Stoics understood something that modern psychology has only recently begun to appreciate. Suppressing emotions doesn't make them disappear, it often makes them stronger and more destructive. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal that would later become Meditations, noted how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. This wasn't advice to ignore our emotional responses to others' actions, but rather to acknowledge them while maintaining focus on our own behavior. When Sarah feels that surge of anger at Marcus's chronic lateness, the Stoic approach doesn't ask her to pretend she's not angry. Instead, it invites her to recognize this anger as valuable information. Her anger is telling her something important, that she values punctuality, respect for others' time, and professional standards. These are not trivial concerns, they reflect deeper values about how people should treat one another in a collaborative environment. But here's where the Stoic wisdom becomes truly transformative. Once Sarah acknowledges her anger without judgment, she creates space for a more profound question. What is this anger asking of me? Perhaps it's asking her to have a private conversation with Marcus about expectations. Maybe it's revealing that she needs to adjust the meeting structure to account for people's different schedules. Or possibly it's showing her that she's been carrying stress about the client deadline and Marcus's lateness is simply the trigger that's bringing that stress to the surface. Seneca, who spent decades navigating the complex world of Roman politics and business, wrote extensively about this process of emotional acknowledgement. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he observed, suggesting that each moment of anger can be the end of unconscious reaction and the beginning of conscious response. When we acknowledge our anger without immediately acting on it, we create what psychologists now call response flexibility, the ability to choose our behavior rather than being driven by our impulses. Consider another scenario. James, a software engineer in Seattle, is working on a critical project when his internet connection fails for the third time this week. His first instinct is to slam his laptop shut and unleash a string of expletives at his internet provider. The Stoic approach doesn't ask James to suppress his frustration or pretend he's not angry about losing hours of work. Instead, it invites him to pause and recognize, I am angry right now, and that's completely understandable. Anyone would be frustrated in this situation. This acknowledgement serves multiple purposes. First, it validates his human experience. Anger is a normal response to obstacles and setbacks. Second, it prevents the additional layer of anger that often comes from being angry about being angry. How often do we compound our frustration by berating ourselves for feeling frustrated in the first place? The Stoics understood that this self-judgment only adds fuel to the fire. Epictetus taught his students that we are not disturbed by events themselves, but by our judgments about those events. However, he never suggested that we shouldn't have judgments or emotional responses. Rather, he encouraged us to examine these responses with curiosity rather than condemnation. When James acknowledges his anger about the internet failure, he can then explore the judgment underlying that anger. I believe my work should proceed smoothly without technical interruptions. This isn't necessarily a wrong belief, but recognizing it as a belief rather than an absolute truth opens up possibilities for different responses. The practice of acknowledging anger also cultivates empathy both for ourselves and others. When Sarah recognizes that her anger at Marcus is natural and understandable, she's more likely to extend that same understanding to Marcus when he inevitably faces his own frustrations. Perhaps his chronic lateness stems from his own struggles with morning anxiety, childcare challenges, or a lengthy commute from Queens. This doesn't excuse his behavior, but it humanizes it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Whenever you want to cheer yourself, consider the good qualities of your companions." This wasn't naive optimism, but practical wisdom. When we acknowledge our own emotional responses without judgment, we're better equipped to see others' behavior as expressions of their own human struggles rather than personal attacks on us. The first step toward mastering anger isn't eliminating it, it's befriending it. It's learning to see anger as a messenger rather than an enemy, as information rather than instruction. When we acknowledge anger as a natural part of the human experience, we stop wasting energy fighting against our own nature and start channeling that energy toward more constructive responses. Lesson 2. Focusing on what you can control. Picture this. It's 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in Chicago, and Rachel, a project manager at a digital marketing firm, is staring at her computer screen in disbelief. The quarterly campaign she's been coordinating for 3 months is due to the client tomorrow, but David, her key team member responsible for the graphic design components, hasn't responded to emails or calls for the past 2 days. The presentation slides are incomplete, the social media assets are missing, and Rachel can feel her blood pressure rising with each passing minute. Her first instinct is to send increasingly frantic messages, call David's emergency contact, and maybe even drive to his apartment to demand an explanation. This scenario perfectly illustrates one of humanity's most exhausting habits: spending enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to control things that are fundamentally beyond our control. Rachel cannot force David to respond to her messages. She cannot control his work ethic, his personal circumstances, or his level of commitment to the project. Yet she's about to exhaust herself trying to do exactly that. This is where the Stoics offer us one of their most liberating insights. Marcus Aurelius, who managed the vast Roman Empire while dealing with rebellious generals, natural disasters, and political upheavals, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This wasn't philosophical theory for Marcus. It was daily practice born from necessity. He couldn't control the barbarian invasions at the empire's borders, but he could control his strategic response. He couldn't control the plague that swept through Rome, but he could control his leadership during the crisis. The Stoic principle of focusing on what you can control isn't about passive acceptance or giving up on influencing outcomes. It's about strategic energy allocation. It's about recognizing that your power is finite and precious, and therefore should be invested where it can actually make a difference. Epictetus, who understood powerlessness intimately from his years as a slave, taught that true freedom comes from this recognition. Some things are within our power, while others are not. He went on to specify, within our power are our opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, position, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. Let's return to Rachel's dilemma and apply this principle practically. What can't Rachel control? David's response time, his work habits, his personal situation, his level of professionalism, or his commitment to deadlines. Trying to control these factors is like trying to control the weather. Frustrating, exhausting, and ultimately futile. But what can Rachel control? Her response to the situation, her communication strategy, her contingency planning, her own work quality, and her emotional state. Once Rachel shifts her focus to her sphere of control, entirely new possibilities emerge. She can control reaching out to David one more time with a clear, professional message that includes a specific deadline and consequences. She can control creating a backup plan by identifying alternative resources or team members who might be able to step in. She can control communicating proactively with her client about potential delays, demonstrating transparency and professionalism. She can control her own stress level by taking deep breaths, going for a brief walk, or practicing the mindfulness techniques we discussed earlier. Seneca, who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics while building a successful business career, understood this principle intimately. He wrote, "Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions. A wise man is prepared for either." Notice that he doesn't say a wise man prevents change or controls fortune. He says a wise man prepares for it by focusing on his response. Consider another example. Michael, a sales representative in Denver, has been working for months to close a major deal with a potential client. He's done everything right, researched their needs, crafted the perfect proposal, built relationships with key decision makers, and followed up consistently. But yesterday, he learned that the client decided to go with a competitor who offered a significantly lower price. Michael's first reaction is to feel angry and defeated. He wants to call the client and argue about their decision, or maybe send a detailed email explaining why they made a mistake. But applying the Stoic principle of control, Michael can ask himself, what aspects of this situation can I actually influence? He cannot control the client's final decision. That's already been made. He cannot control his competitor's pricing strategy or the client's budget constraints. He cannot control the client's internal politics or decision-making process. However, he can control how he responds to this setback. He can control what he learns from this experience to improve future proposals. He can control maintaining a professional relationship with this client for potential future opportunities. He can control his own emotional recovery and how quickly he bounces back to pursue other prospects. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his personal journal, "Confine yourself to the present." This wasn't advice to ignore the future or forget the past, but rather to focus your active energy on what you can influence right now, in this moment. The present moment is the only place where your power actually exists. You cannot change what David did yesterday, but you can influence what happens in your project today. You cannot control whether that client will change their mind tomorrow, but you can control how you invest your sales energy today. The practice of focusing on what you can control also reveals something profound about the nature of stress and anger. Most of our emotional turmoil comes from the gap between what we want to control and what we actually can control. When we align our efforts with our actual sphere of influence, stress naturally decreases and effectiveness naturally increases. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to outcomes. Rachel still cares deeply about her project's success, and Michael still wants to close deals. But they're learning to channel their caring into areas where it can actually make a difference. As Epictetus taught, don't demand that things happen as you wish, Wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. Lesson 3. Practicing mindfulness. It's 3:47 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon in San Francisco, and Emma, a software developer at a bustling tech startup, is deep in concentration, debugging a critical piece of code that's been causing system crashes. She's been working on this problem for 2 hours straight, finally making progress when her colleague Jake taps her on the shoulder. "Hey Emma, quick question about the user interface mockups," he says, launching into a detailed explanation without waiting for her response. Before she can even process his question, her phone buzzes with a Slack notification, her email pings with an urgent message from her manager, and someone in the next cubicle starts a loud phone conversation about weekend plans. Emma feels her concentration shatter like glass. Her jaw clenches, her shoulders tense, and she can feel irritation rising in her chest. Her first instinct is to snap at Jake, tell her noisy colleague to keep it down, and maybe throw her phone into the nearest drawer. But instead of reacting immediately, Emma takes a deep breath and pauses. In that pause, that precious moment between stimulus and response, lies the power of mindfulness. The Stoics understood mindfulness centuries before it became a modern buzzword. They called it prosok, which translates to attention or mindfulness of the present moment. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end," reminding us that each moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose our response rather than being driven by automatic reactions. This isn't about suppressing our emotions or pretending we don't feel frustrated. It's about creating space between our experiences and our reactions to them. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal during military campaigns, practiced this constantly. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But notice that he says power over your mind, not power to eliminate your mind's reactions. Mindfulness doesn't make us emotionless robots. It makes us conscious participants in our own lives. When Emma pauses and breathes, she's not trying to make her frustration disappear. Instead, she's observing it with curiosity. "I notice that I'm feeling frustrated right now. My shoulders are tense, my breathing is shallow, and I have an urge to respond sharply to Jake." This observation creates what psychologists call metacognition, awareness of our own thinking processes. It's like stepping outside of yourself for a moment and watching your own emotional weather patterns. Epictetus taught his students, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The key word here is react, not feel, but react. Emma will naturally feel frustrated when her concentration is broken. That's human. But her reaction, what she chooses to do with that frustration, is entirely within her control. Let's explore a practical mindfulness technique that Emma can use in this moment. First, she focuses on her breathing, not trying to change it, just noticing it. "I'm breathing quickly and shallowly right now," she observes. Then she takes 3 slow, deliberate breaths, counting each one. This simple act pulls her attention away from the external chaos and anchors it in something she can directly control, her breath. Next, Emma practices what Stoics call objective representation. Instead of thinking, "Jake is so inconsiderate, he always interrupts me at the worst possible moments," she reframes the situation objectively. "Jake approached me with a work-related question while I was focused on another task. He likely doesn't know that I'm working on something urgent. This reframing doesn't excuse inconsiderate behavior, but it removes the emotional charge that comes from assuming malicious intent. Consider another scenario. David, a financial advisor in Boston, is stuck in traffic on the Mass Pike during his commute home. He's already 20 minutes late for his daughter's soccer game, and the cars around him aren't moving. His phone keeps buzzing with text messages from his wife asking where he is. David can feel his stress levels rising, his grip tightening on the steering wheel, and his mind racing with worst-case scenarios about missing important moments in his daughter's life. This is a perfect opportunity for what Seneca called the discipline of desire, learning to work with reality as it is, not as we wish it were. David cannot make the traffic move faster, but he can practice mindfulness to transform this frustrating experience into something more manageable, even productive. First, David acknowledges his emotional state without judgment. I'm feeling anxious and frustrated right now, and that makes complete sense given the situation. Then he engages his senses mindfully. He notices the late afternoon sunlight filtering through his windshield, the classical music playing softly on the radio, the comfortable temperature in his car. He's not trying to pretend everything is perfect, but he's expanding his awareness beyond just the traffic and his frustration. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." For David, this means releasing his mental rehearsals of apologizing to his daughter and his wife's disappointed expression. Those scenarios exist only in his imagination and serve no constructive purpose. Instead, he can use this time to practice gratitude for having a job that allows him to support his family, for having a daughter whose games he cares about attending, for having a reliable car and a safe route home. The practice of mindfulness also helps us recognize patterns in our emotional responses. Emma might notice that she consistently feels overwhelmed around 3 p.m. when her blood sugar drops and her caffeine wears off. This awareness allows her to plan better, maybe scheduling a healthy snack or taking a brief walk during that time. David might realize that his traffic anxiety is amplified when he's already running late, leading him to build more buffer time into his schedule. Lesson 4. Embracing impermanence. Jake Martinez had it all figured out. At 32, he was the founder and CEO of a promising fintech startup in Denver's bustling Rhino district. His company had just secured series of funding, his team was growing, and tech publications were calling him one to watch in the Colorado startup scene. He'd been working 16-hour days for 3 years, sacrificing relationships and personal time, but it all seemed worth it. The future looked bright, predictable, and entirely under his control. Then March 2020 happened. Within 2 weeks, his primary investors pulled their funding, 3 major clients canceled their contracts, and half his team had to be laid off. Jake found himself sitting in his empty office at 2 a.m., staring at financial projections that no longer made sense, feeling like his entire world had collapsed. His first reaction was rage. At the circumstances, at the investors, at the unfairness of it all. His second reaction was to fight desperately to return everything to the way it was before. But this is precisely where the Stoic understanding of impermanence becomes not just helpful, but essential for survival and growth. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled during plagues, wars, and constant political upheaval, wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." This wasn't philosophical theorizing. It was hard-won wisdom from someone who understood that fighting against change is like fighting against gravity. exhausting, futile, and ultimately self-destructive. The Stoics didn't view impermanence as a cruel fact to be endured, but as a fundamental principle of existence to be embraced. Everything in the universe is in constant flux, from the smallest atoms to the largest galaxies, from our daily moods to our life circumstances. Heraclitus, who influenced Stoic thought, famously said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice. The river is always changing, and so are we." For Jake, understanding impermanence doesn't mean accepting defeat or becoming passive. Instead, it means recognizing that his attachment to a specific outcome, his original vision for his company, was causing him additional suffering beyond the actual business challenges. The business setback was painful enough. His resistance to accepting the changed reality was making it unbearable. Seneca, who experienced tremendous wealth and devastating losses multiple times in his life, wrote, "Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions. A wise man is prepared for either." Notice that he doesn't say a wise man prevents change. He says a wise man prepares for it. This preparation isn't primarily logistical, though planning matters. It's psychological and philosophical. Consider another example. Maria, a marketing executive in Miami, had been in what she thought was a stable, loving relationship for 4 years. She and her partner Carlos had talked about marriage, bought a condo together, and intertwined their lives completely. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Carlos told her he'd been questioning their relationship for months and needed space to figure things out. Within a week, he'd moved out, leaving Maria alone in their shared home, surrounded by reminders of their life together. Maria's first instinct was to do everything possible to convince Carlos to come back, to promise changes, to argue about their good times together, to analyze every conversation for clues about what went wrong. She spent weeks oscillating between hope that things would return to normal and despair that they never would. But this emotional roller coaster was exhausting her, preventing her from processing what was actually happening and moving forward constructively. The Stoic approach to impermanence would invite Maria to recognize that relationships, like everything else in life, are subject to change. This doesn't minimize the pain of loss or suggest that she shouldn't grieve. Instead, it offers a framework for understanding that change, even unwanted change, is part of the natural order of things. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you." The key insight is that fate both binds and unbinds, associates and separates. Embracing impermanence also means recognizing that our current difficulties are temporary. Jake's business crisis, while serious, is not permanent. Market conditions will change, new opportunities will emerge, and his skills and experience will remain valuable regardless of this particular venture's outcome. Maria's heartbreak, while genuine and painful, will not last forever. Her capacity for love, her personal growth from this relationship, and her ability to build new connections remain intact. This perspective doesn't trivialize current pain, it contextualizes it. When Jake understands that his current situation is temporary, he can make decisions based on long-term wisdom rather than short-term desperation. Instead of frantically trying to recreate his previous circumstances, he can ask, "What is this situation teaching me? How can I adapt and perhaps even improve upon what I had before?" The practice of embracing impermanence also enhances our appreciation of positive experiences. When we truly understand that nothing lasts forever, we're more likely to savor good moments instead of taking them for granted. Jake might have been so focused on future growth that he never fully appreciated the excitement of those early startup days. Maria might have assumed her relationship stability would continue indefinitely, missing opportunities to express gratitude for what she had while she had it. Marcus Aurelius practiced a daily reflection on impermanence. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This wasn't pessimism, it was realistic preparation for the day's challenges, coupled with the understanding that these challenges, like all experiences, would pass. Practically speaking, embracing impermanence means developing what psychologists call psychological flexibility, the ability to adapt our thoughts and behaviors to changing circumstances rather than rigidly clinging to previous patterns. For Jake, this might mean exploring new business models or even considering whether entrepreneurship is still the right path for him. For Maria, it might mean rediscovering aspects of herself that got submerged in the relationship and exploring new possibilities for personal growth. The Stoics also taught that impermanence applies to our emotions themselves. Jake's current anger and disappointment are temporary states, not permanent aspects of his character. Maria's heartbreak, while real and valid, will eventually transform into something else. Perhaps wisdom, compassion, or renewed capacity for love. As Seneca reminded us, this too shall pass applies to both our difficulties and our emotions about those difficulties. Lesson 5. Understanding your emotions. Dr. Lisa Chin, a cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, prides herself on maintaining composure under pressure. She's performed countless emergency procedures, delivered difficult diagnoses to families, and navigated the intense politics of hospital administration with apparent calm. But there's one situation that consistently triggers an emotional response she struggles to understand: medical conferences where she's presenting her research to peers. Last month, during a presentation on innovative cardiac procedures, a senior colleague from Johns Hopkins interrupted her mid-sentence to question her methodology. "Dr. Chin," he said with a condescending tone, "I'm curious about your sample size. It seems rather small for the conclusions you're drawing." Lisa felt her face flush, her heart rate spike, and an overwhelming surge of anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. She managed to respond professionally, but spent the rest of the conference replaying the interaction, feeling frustrated and confused about her intense reaction. This scenario perfectly illustrates why the Stoics placed such emphasis on understanding our emotions rather than simply trying to control them. Epictetus taught, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. Lisa's anger wasn't really about the colleague's question, it was about her interpretation of what that question meant about her competence, her credibility, and her place in the medical community. The Stoic approach to emotional understanding begins with what Marcus Aurelius called objective representation, seeing situations as they actually are, stripped of our interpretations and judgments. The objective facts of Lisa's situation were: a colleague asked a question about her research methodology during a professional presentation. Everything else, the condescending tone, the implied criticism, the threat to her reputation, existed in her interpretation of the event. But here's where Stoic wisdom becomes truly practical. Understanding our interpretations isn't about dismissing them as wrong or irrational. Instead, it's about recognizing them as information about our deeper values, fears, and beliefs. Lisa's intense reaction revealed something important. She deeply values being seen as competent and credible in her field. This isn't a character flaw, it's a natural and even admirable aspect of professional identity. The problem arises when this value becomes so rigid that any perceived challenge to it triggers disproportionate emotional responses. Seneca, who spent decades navigating the complex world of Roman politics, wrote, "Every emotion is accompanied by a judgment." Lisa's anger was accompanied by judgments like, "He's trying to undermine me, my research isn't good enough, and everyone will think I'm incompetent." These judgments happened so quickly and automatically that she experienced them as facts rather than interpretations. Consider another example. Michael, a high school teacher in Atlanta, consistently feels frustrated and angry when his students seem disengaged during class. Yesterday, while explaining a complex concept in American history, he noticed several students looking at their phones, 2 others whispering to each other, and 1 student who appeared to be sleeping. Michael felt his jaw clench and his voice become sharper as he called for attention. Later, he found himself ruminating about kids these days and questioning whether he was cut out for teaching. Applying Stoic emotional analysis, Michael can begin to unpack what's really happening beneath his frustration. The surface emotion is anger at student behavior, but deeper investigation reveals several underlying judgments. Students should be naturally interested in what I'm teaching, their disengagement reflects my failure as an educator, and respectful attention is something I deserve. Each of these judgments contains both truth and distortion. It's true that engaged students learn better, and it's natural for Michael to want his students to succeed. It's also true that teacher effectiveness matters, and Michael's concern about his impact is admirable. However, the judgment that students should be naturally engaged ignores the reality of adolescent development, competing priorities, and individual learning styles. The belief that student disengagement always reflects teacher failure ignores factors like home stress, learning differences, and the simple fact that not every lesson will captivate every student. Marcus Aurelius practiced daily self-examination, writing, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being." This wasn't about forcing himself to feel differently, but about understanding his resistance and choosing his response based on his values rather than his immediate emotions. For Lisa, understanding her conference anxiety might reveal that her anger masks a deeper fear of being exposed as inadequate, a fear that many high-achieving professionals carry. This fear isn't irrational, it's based on real experiences of judgment and competition in academic medicine. But recognizing it as fear rather than experiencing it as anger opens up different response options. She might prepare more thoroughly for questions, practice receiving criticism gracefully, or remind herself that being questioned is a normal part of scholarly discourse, not a personal attack. The Stoics also taught that emotions contain wisdom about our values. Michael's frustration with disengaged students reflects his genuine care for education and his students' success. Lisa's conference anxiety reflects her commitment to excellence and professional integrity. The goal isn't to eliminate these emotions, but to understand what they're telling us about what matters to us, then choose responses that honor those values while remaining grounded in reality. Epictetus reminded his students, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it." Understanding our emotions isn't an intellectual exercise, it's a practical skill that allows us to respond to life's challenges from a place of wisdom rather than reactive habit. Lesson 6. Developing Patience. David Rodriguez has been commuting from his apartment in Queens to his job in Manhattan for 3 years, and he thought he'd mastered the art of New York City travel. But this Tuesday morning is testing every ounce of his patience. First, his usual subway line is experiencing signal problems, a euphemism that every New Yorker knows means you're going to be late. After waiting 15 minutes on the platform, packed shoulder to shoulder with increasingly agitated commuters, David finally boards a train so crowded he can barely breathe. 20 minutes later, the train stops between stations and sits motionless for another 10 minutes. David can feel his stress mounting as he checks his phone repeatedly, calculating that he's now going to be 30 minutes late for an important client meeting. His jaw is clenched, his shoulders are rigid, and he's fighting the urge to push through the crowd toward the door, as if somehow getting closer to the exit will make the train move faster. This scenario captures one of modern life's greatest challenges: learning to wait gracefully in a world that promises instant everything. But the Stoics understood that patience isn't just about enduring delays. It's about how we choose to be while we wait. Marcus Aurelius, who spent years waiting for military campaigns to unfold and political situations to resolve, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." David cannot make the subway move, but he has complete control over how he experiences this delay. Seneca, who understood the frustrations of daily life in ancient Rome, taught that patience is not passive endurance but active virtue. Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions. A wise man is prepared for either, he wrote. For David, this means recognizing that delays and obstacles are not aberrations in his day. They are predictable features of urban life that he can prepare for mentally and practically. The first step in developing Stoic patience is adjusting our expectations to align with reality. David's frustration stems partly from his belief that his commute should be smooth and predictable. But 3 years of experience have shown him that subway delays are common, especially during rush hour. By expecting delays rather than being surprised by them, David can reduce the emotional impact when they occur. Consider another example. Jennifer, a pediatric nurse in Los Angeles, works in a busy emergency room where she regularly encounters parents who are anxious, demanding, and sometimes hostile about wait times. Yesterday, a father whose child had a minor injury became increasingly agitated as they waited to be seen, repeatedly approaching Jennifer's station to ask when the doctor would be available. "We've been waiting for 2 hours, he exclaimed. "This is ridiculous. My son is in pain." Jennifer's first instinct was to feel defensive and irritated. She wanted to explain that emergency rooms operate on a triage system, that more serious cases take priority, and that his son's injury, while uncomfortable, was not life-threatening. But instead of reacting immediately, Jennifer paused and applied Stoic principles of patience. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Jennifer recognized that the father's behavior, while frustrating, was driven by love for his child and anxiety about his well-being. This understanding didn't excuse his rudeness, but it helped Jennifer respond with compassion rather than defensiveness. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called the discipline of action, choosing responses that align with virtue rather than impulse. For Jennifer, this meant taking a deep breath, acknowledging the father's concern, and explaining the situation calmly. "I understand your frustration, and I can see how much you care about your son. The doctor will see him as soon as possible, and I'll check on his pain level right now." The Stoics also taught that patience is strengthened through practice in small situations. David can use his subway delay as an opportunity to develop patience that will serve him in larger life challenges. Instead of spending the delay time in frustration, he can practice what Seneca called making use of the present moment. He might listen to an audiobook, practice deep breathing, or simply observe his fellow passengers with curiosity rather than irritation. This shift in perspective transforms waiting from wasted time into valuable time. David realizes he can use his commute delays for personal development, learning new skills through podcasts, practicing mindfulness, or even catching up on work emails. The delay hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer purely negative. Jennifer can apply similar principles in her work environment. When faced with impatient families, she can see each interaction as an opportunity to practice compassion, communication skills, and emotional regulation. These aren't just professional skills. They're life skills that will benefit her relationships, her own stress levels, and her overall well-being. The Stoics understood that patience is ultimately about accepting the pace of reality rather than demanding that reality conform to our preferred timeline. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate associates you." David cannot control subway schedules, but he can control his response to delays. Jennifer cannot control emergency room wait times, but she can control how she interacts with anxious families. Developing patience also means celebrating small victories. When David manages to stay calm during a delay that would have previously ruined his mood, he should acknowledge this growth. When Jennifer responds compassionately to a difficult parent instead of becoming defensive, she's demonstrating real progress in developing this essential virtue. Lesson 7. Learning to forgive. Rachel Thompson, a registered nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, thought she had a good relationship with her older sister Karen until last Thanksgiving. During what was supposed to be a peaceful family gathering, Karen made a comment that cut Rachel to the core. "Well, at least some of us didn't waste our potential by becoming a glorified babysitter." The words were delivered with a smile in front of their parents and extended family, but Rachel knew exactly what Karen meant. Throughout their lives, Karen had always been the successful one, the lawyer with the corner office, the six-figure salary, and the prestigious address in Back Bay. 6 months later, Rachel still feels a surge of anger every time she thinks about that comment. She's replayed the moment hundreds of times, crafting perfect comebacks she never delivered, imagining confrontations that never happened. The resentment has poisoned family gatherings, strained her relationship with her parents, and even affected her work performance as she finds herself distracted by imaginary arguments with her sister. This is where the Stoic understanding of forgiveness becomes not just helpful but essential for psychological freedom. Marcus Aurelius, who dealt with betrayals, political enemies, and personal disappointments throughout his reign, wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This wasn't advice to ignore harmful behavior, but rather to focus our energy on what we can actually control, our own responses and choices. The Stoic approach to forgiveness begins with a crucial distinction. Forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about us. Rachel's continued anger at Karen isn't hurting Karen, who has likely forgotten the comment entirely. It's hurting Rachel, consuming her mental energy, affecting her relationships, and preventing her from fully engaging with her life. As Seneca wrote, "Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured." But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that hurtful behavior didn't happen or that it was acceptable. Karen's comment was dismissive, condescending, and hurtful. Rachel's anger is a natural and valid response to being diminished and disrespected. The Stoic path isn't about suppressing these feelings, but about choosing what to do with them. Epictetus, who experienced profound injustice as a slave before becoming one of history's greatest teachers of freedom, understood that holding on to resentment is a form of voluntary imprisonment. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, he taught. Rachel cannot change what Karen said, but she can choose how long she allows that moment to control her emotional life. Consider another example. James, a small business owner in Seattle, discovered that his longtime business partner and friend had been embezzling money from their company for over 2 years. The betrayal was devastating, not just financially, but personally. James had trusted this person completely, had been a groomsman at his wedding, had considered him family. The discovery led to legal proceedings, the dissolution of their partnership, and significant financial losses that threatened James's ability to keep his business afloat. James's first instinct was to seek revenge, to make sure everyone in their industry knew what his former partner had done, to pursue every legal avenue available to make him pay for the betrayal. These feelings were entirely understandable and, in some cases, legally appropriate. But James found that his anger was consuming him, affecting his sleep, his relationships with his family, and his ability to focus on rebuilding his business. The Stoic practice of forgiveness doesn't ask James to forget what happened or to trust his former partner again. Instead, it invites him to recognize that his continued anger is now causing him additional harm beyond the original betrayal. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." For James, this means not allowing his former partner's dishonesty to make him bitter, suspicious, or unable to trust others in the future. Forgiveness, from a Stoic perspective, is ultimately an act of self-liberation. It's choosing to reclaim the mental and emotional energy that we've been investing in resentment and redirecting it toward constructive purposes. Rachel can choose to focus on the meaningful work she does as a nurse, the lives she impacts, and the relationships that truly matter to her. James can channel his energy into rebuilding his business, strengthening his remaining relationships, and learning from this experience without being defined by it. The process of forgiveness often begins with understanding. Marcus Aurelius practiced daily reflection on human nature, writing, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They're like this because they can't tell good from evil." This wasn't cynicism, but realistic preparation coupled with compassion for human fallibility. Rachel might consider that Karen's comment likely stems from her own insecurities, perhaps about the meaning and value of her own work, or from family dynamics that have nothing to do with Rachel personally. This understanding doesn't excuse the hurtful behavior, but it can help Rachel see it as Karen's limitation rather than Rachel's inadequacy. Seneca taught that forgiveness is often a gradual process. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Each day that Rachel chooses not to rehearse her anger, each moment that James focuses on his future rather than his past betrayal, is a step toward freedom. Lesson 8. Practicing self-control. Carlos Mendez, a software engineer at a major tech company in Seattle, knows he has a problem. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and he's been scrolling through social media for the past 2 hours instead of getting the sleep he desperately needs. Tomorrow is a crucial presentation to senior leadership about a project he's been leading for 6 months, and he should have been in bed hours ago. But every time he tries to put his phone down, he finds himself picking it back up just to check one more thing. This scenario has become a nightly ritual for Carlos. He sets intentions to have a healthy evening routine, dinner, a brief walk, some reading, and early sleep. But consistently, he finds himself drawn into the endless scroll of notifications, videos, and posts that promise entertainment but leave him feeling empty and anxious. His sleep suffers, his morning energy is depleted, and his work performance is beginning to decline. He knows what he should do, but knowing and doing seem to exist in completely different universes. This is where the Stoic understanding of self-control becomes not just helpful, but essential for living according to our values rather than our impulses. Epictetus, who understood the difference between external slavery and internal freedom better than perhaps anyone in history, taught, "No one can harm you without your permission." Carlos is giving his phone permission to harm his sleep, his health, and his professional performance. The good news is that this permission can be revoked. The Stoics understood that self-control isn't about willpower alone, it's about creating systems and practices that make good choices easier and bad choices harder. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Carlos cannot control the addictive design of social media platforms, but he has complete control over his phone's location, his evening routines, and his responses to the urge to scroll. Seneca, who navigated the temptations of wealth, power, and luxury in ancient Rome, practiced what he called voluntary discomfort, deliberately exposing himself to minor hardships to strengthen his ability to resist temptation and endure difficulty. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" He wrote. For Carlos, this might mean deliberately creating friction between himself and his phone. He could charge his phone in another room, use a traditional alarm clock instead of his phone, or establish a phone curfew at 9 p.m. These aren't permanent restrictions but training exercises designed to strengthen his ability to choose his actions rather than being driven by impulses. Consider another example. Maria, a marketing executive in Miami, struggles with a different kind of self-control challenge. During stressful periods at work, she finds herself snapping at her team members, sending emails with a sharp tone, and making decisions based on frustration rather than strategic thinking. Last week, when a client requested major changes to a campaign that was already in production, Maria's first instinct was to fire off an angry email explaining why the request was unreasonable and disruptive. Fortunately, Maria has been practicing Stoic principles and recognized the surge of anger before acting on it. Instead of immediately responding, she applied what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of action, pausing to consider whether her proposed response aligned with her values and long-term goals. She asked herself, will sending this angry email solve the problem or create additional problems? Will it strengthen my relationship with this client or damage it? Will I be proud of this response tomorrow? The practice of self-control often begins with what Epictetus called impressions, the initial thoughts and impulses that arise in response to situations. Don't be carried away by the force of an impression, he taught. When it strikes you, say, impression, wait for me a little. Let me see what you are and what you represent. This pause between impulse and action is where freedom lives. For Carlos, this might mean recognizing the moment when he feels the urge to check his phone and saying to himself, I notice I want to check social media right now. This is just an impulse, not a command. I can choose to act on it or not. This recognition doesn't make the impulse disappear, but it creates space for conscious choice. Maria can apply the same principle to her workplace interactions. When she feels anger rising in response to a frustrating client request, she can pause and observe, I'm feeling angry right now and I have an impulse to respond sharply. But I can choose how to express this concern in a way that serves my professional goals. The Stoics also understood that self-control is strengthened through practice in small situations. Carlos can build his ability to resist his phone by first practicing with smaller temptations, perhaps waiting 5 minutes before checking email or finishing one task completely before starting another. Maria can practice emotional regulation in low-stakes situations, so she's better prepared for high-pressure moments. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being." This daily recommitment to our values, despite our impulses to the contrary, is the essence of self-control. It's not about perfection, but about consistently choosing our principles over our immediate desires. As we reach the end of our journey together today, I want you to imagine yourself 6 months from now walking through your daily life with a fundamentally different relationship to anger and frustration. Picture Sarah no longer letting Marcus's chronic lateness derail her morning, but instead using those moments as opportunities to practice patience. Envision Rachel transforming her project management approach by focusing entirely on what she can control, leading her team with calm confidence even when circumstances become chaotic. These transformations aren't fantasy, they're the natural result of consistently applying the 8 Stoic principles we've explored together. When you acknowledge anger as natural rather than fighting against your humanity, you create space for wisdom. When you focus on what you can control, you reclaim your power from circumstances. When you practice mindfulness, you choose your responses rather than being driven by automatic reactions. When you embrace impermanence, you find peace in change and strength in uncertainty. But here's what I want you to understand most deeply. These aren't just individual skills to be mastered in isolation. They're interconnected practices that reinforce each other. Your mindfulness will make it easier to focus on what you can control. Your understanding of impermanence will support your ability to forgive. Your self-control will enhance your patience, and your patience will deepen your capacity for forgiveness. Marcus Aurelius, writing during some of the most challenging periods in Roman history, reminded himself, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." This isn't about positive thinking, it's about recognizing that your response to difficulties is where your true power lies. Every single day you'll have opportunities to practice these principles. The traffic jam that makes you late, the colleague who doesn't meet expectations, the technology that fails at the worst moment, these aren't obstacles to your peace of mind. They're your training ground for developing inner strength that can't be shaken by external circumstances. Start small. Choose one principle that resonates most strongly with you right now. Maybe it's practicing mindfulness during your commute or acknowledging your anger without judgment the next time someone frustrates you. Remember, the Stoics were practical people living real lives with real challenges. They offered tools tested by centuries of human experience. The transformation you're capable of isn't just about managing anger better, it's about developing character that remains steady in storms, finds opportunity in obstacles, and treats every challenge as a chance to practice virtue. It's about becoming someone who contributes to the world's peace rather than its chaos. If today's exploration has resonated with you, make this journey a regular part of your life. Subscribe to STOIC VIVU, where we're building a community committed to applying timeless wisdom to modern challenges. Hit that notification bell so you never miss insights that can support your transformation. Share this video with someone who might benefit, a friend struggling with workplace stress, a family member facing relationship challenges, or a colleague dealing with difficult changes. Like this video to help others discover these life-changing principles. Your engagement helps us reach more people ready to transform their relationship with anger. The ancient philosophers understood that wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied. Together, we're not just learning about philosophy, we're actively transforming our lives and helping transform the world around us. The journey continues, and I'm honored to walk this path with you.